Hello and good morning friends, welcome to CEC-UGC live lecture. Dear friends, in this session today we are going to talk about public relation in crisis. Most of you have heard about the term public relation. According to one of the definitions of public relations is a planned, deliberate and sustained effort to establish relationship between the organization and its public. Now the question arises, what is public? Any organization has its internal and external public, and as per our topic is public relations in crisis. Today we are going to discuss what basically crisis communication is. That is, at the time of the crisis within the organization, what are the functions which are needed to be played so that the crisis in the organization could be solved. So my dear friends, today we have with us within our studios Mr. Benul Tomar. He is a marketing consultant as well as he has 5 years of experience in media management. He has authored the various coffee table books for different educational organizations, basically for the higher education as well as great cities. So first of all, I would like to welcome our guest, Mr. Benul Tomar, and through his experience as well as through his vast knowledge, we would be learning about what basically crisis communication is, and at the time of the crisis, what is done so that the harmony could be maintained within the organization. So I would like to welcome our guest, Mr. Benul Tomar. Sir, welcome to the EduSet lecture, and I hope that through your immense knowledge today we are going to know about public relation, how public relations as well as the other management functions plays a crucial role at the time of the crisis.
Absolutely. First of all, to begin with, the term crisis management has emerged out of an institutional and planned response to a crisis. Now, at an individual level, we are never, far away from crisis. Crisis basically is a situation that we don't want to be in, to put it plainly. Now, the crisis basically is the uncertainty. Things we don't know what is going to happen tomorrow. We are afraid of its negative consequences. So, crisis basically is a part of our social, professional, and societal ecosystem. Now, at individual level, how we face crisis? The first response is of shock. When something nasty happens, we are in a state of shock. The next stage is denial. We don't want to believe that something wrong has happened to us. Then the acceptance of the reality sets in. And then the remedial measures to come out of that situation happens. Now this is basic psychology of an individual, how it deals with a crisis. When it comes to institutions, things become different. When crisis emerges in an institutions, the basic psychological level remains the same, but the efforts to deal with it becomes more systematic. Now that's where crisis management comes in. Now when we say the role of PR in crisis management, the public relation part dealing with the external public. See, the first casualty of a crisis is the brand equity of the company. We have seen so many examples. I mean, even big companies like Pepsi, Johnson & Johnson, worldwide. I mean, even these big companies suffer from crisis. Now, in most of the cases, in big companies, people have a set plan to deal with the crisis. They have the 3 stages that we will be dealing with in subsequent slides. We will see that how these companies deal with a crisis in a planned way. Now, when crisis becomes a part of it, the public relation is a very important ingredient, because when brand equity becomes a casualty, then it becomes paramount on any organization to dispense that negative image from the minds of public. Now PR being a concerted effort to use media to modify or to enhance one's image, so therefore public relation is very important in crisis management. Now to begin with, first of all, let us understand what crisis actually is in organizational perspective. Crisis means a crisis happens when normal order in any system is destabilized, which creates uncertainty and requires rapid intervention, primarily because crisis generally spells negative consequences for any organization. So this is the very simplistic definition for crisis. Atkins combined many other definitions, and these are the bulleted points where what crisis means, what is the definition of crisis. Now it is an unexpected and unpredictable event which is caused by some type of event that, one, threatens organization stakeholders' expectations, and that stakeholders include common public, the shareholders, the media, the government, and everybody that is remotely associated with the organization. Event that places non-routine demands on organizations, the demands that are unheard of, demands that we do not anticipate, right? For example, if a company has laid off too many employees, now suddenly a situation of emergency occurs when the company runs short of people. Now the demand emerges that the company has to recruit more people in order to counter that insurgency. So this is a non-routine demand which is unusual, that places, and that is a stress and a burden, because then you need to plan for that, for in this case the hiring. So that takes a toll on the organization planning. And it produces uncertainty in our organizations. People don't know what is going to happen next. I mean, there are many instances where companies were on the verge of closure. So when people do not know whether the company will survive or not, when there is certain kind of existential crisis, I think that is the most detrimental thing that can happen to any company. Because it also has a negative impact on organizational performance. When people are not sure about their future, then it generally has a negative impact on the productivity of the employees. It potentially produces negative outcomes, that is a foregone conclusion. It threats high priority organization goals which are generally short term. For example, if a company wants to achieve a certain kind of turnover or increase the market share to a particular percentage, and then these short term goals are impacted immediately because of the aftermath of the crisis. It harms the organization and the public, because there have been some instances where, let's say in Cadbury, we will later see in the slide, Cadbury is a big brand of chocolates, and there were complaints of worms being found out in its pieces, in the chocolates. Now that is a huge crisis, because eventually it will harm the public and as well as the organization in a big way. So the consequences are for both. That's why it's a matter of concern for the organization. And it produces accusations concerning the organization. In time, there are a lot of grapevine and all the negative rumors and gossips and all those things going on which negatively impact the image of the company. Now this is the most inclusive definition of crisis. Now what is crisis communications? Basically, when we say the public relation in crisis, public relation is the communication for crisis, right? So the crisis communication, basically it is, in most simplistic terms, it is collection of information, relevant information, processing of the information, and then dissemination of the information. Now at all these three stages, there is certain kind of mediation. We select information, then we process the information, we will send out information only which is necessary to salvage the situation, and then we distribute it through various media channels externally and through internal communication system to its own employees and stakeholders. Now what are the types of crisis? Crisis is an uncertainty, but what we can be certain about is we can categorize it into different forms. Now we can have economic crisis such as labor problems, when stock market falls. And there was a certain mortgage crisis in the whole Western world when we saw the stock market coming down and then banks going bankrupt themselves. So it was a huge crisis. It was an industrial crisis, not an organizational crisis. So crisis in many cases are economic. In most of the cases it is economic because every crisis has economic repercussions. Then information crisis, such crucial data being lost. And we have seen, in Swiss bank, somebody hacked some ex-employee stole the important information in Swiss banks regarding the Swiss bank accounts. So that is a crisis for the bank itself because it leads to loss of reputation and data secrecy. Physical or operational crisis, when we have equipment malfunctions, product failures. Then human resource crisis, somebody dies, somebody gets handicapped. Then reputational crisis, defamations, gossips, rumors. Psychopathic acts, terrorism, criminal acts, natural disasters, fires, floods, hurricanes. So the crisis is the uncertainty. There are ways we can plan to deal with a crisis. For example, we can have install best of the machines in our company and to avoid any malfunction, etc. So machines could be one of the best, but this necessarily may not prevent an accident to happen because of human error. Somebody plunges himself into the machine by accident. So these are the things we cannot plan, basically. So that is the X factor of crisis, that you never know when it's going to come. Of course, one gets signals of crisis, we will be seeing that. Then stages in crisis communications. There are basically three phases. Pre-crisis phase, when we visualize the crisis to happen. Now we can say that we can in a way sometimes anticipate that a crisis is going to set on. Then there are nature, possible solutions, stakeholders. So pre-crisis basically means receiving the signals, getting them, and anticipating the impending crisis that is going to happen. Then during crisis, of course, company takes steps to salvage the situation, and it mounts the response which is constantly informed of the latest happening and development. Basically, when we say we are doing crisis management, be it through PR, be it through any other form of communication, be it the steps that a company takes to come out of that situation. If a company has, if there is a product malfunction, then company recalls its product from the market. These are the steps that company takes. All these come under the response to crisis phase, which is the middle phase. And then we have post-crisis phase, where we acknowledge that something has to be learned out of this crisis, and appropriate lessons being learned and the response being taken. Now in pre-event case, these are the things that one can do to anticipate or plan for the crisis. Now there are regular internal meetings, monitoring of the systems, of the people, warning protocols being issued from time to time, what are the precautions that employees have to take, then direction, staging of the equipment and personnel, safety protocols being issued, insurance cover being increased or decreased as per requirement, and then of course corporate communications to inform people about the working of the company and about any situation that can lead to a crisis. Now crisis response, basically, now earlier we talked about the individual response to crisis. Now in case of institutions, the response psychologically is the same. Company receives a shock in form of a crisis. Even if it had anticipated the crisis, there is a shock, then there is a denial, then there is acceptance, and then there is recovery. So after initial response, the whole onus lies on how to regain the reputation, how to repair the reputation that has been lost. Now in this phase, company shows an intent before the public that the first thing that should be kept in mind while dealing with a crisis in front of public. The first thing one can do is to acknowledge the problem. That is the most important thing. Honesty is very important, because if you don't seem to be honest in the eyes of public in a crisis, then it is surely going to end up in a mess. So first of all, it has to be acknowledged properly. It has to be then dealt with properly to take the correction steps that are required, and then to properly communicate the steps taken by the company along with the intent of the company, so that people know that company has taken a corrective course and it is back in the business. And of course, apology is a big word. I think in public relations, especially in corporate communications, apology derives a lot of meaning, because if you are apologetic of what has happened, that shows your intent, that you are ready to correct it, you are ready to enhance your image by doing something substantial. If you are not apologetic about it, it means you are in a denial mode that will lead to further loss of reputation. Now in post-event scenario, we have damage assessment, crisis counseling of the people so that they are not demoralized and they are back into full productivity. So a counseling has to be done post-crisis. Then renewed safety protocols being issued. In case of an operational crisis, then deployment of equipment, personnel and supplies has to be done. Then proper communication to both internal and external stakeholders. That is very important, because what corrective measures have you taken, it is very important for the company to communicate them. And then support of the team members is sought. Now, crisis communication deals on two planes. One is internal communication, which is basically to inform people about what wrong has happened, for them to accept it and take corrective measures. And it is also important in this case that employees do not hear negative crisis related news from outside source first, because internally it is the duty of the organization to inform them beforehand with authentic information, because outside information may or may not be true. This is also important to alienate them so that they can carry on with their work without being unnecessarily bothered and mount a successful and substantial response. Then external communication is done to shareholders, investors, suppliers, distributors, retail dealers, consumers, media, women, basically all stakeholders needs to be communicated, and this is done through public relation, concerted public relation efforts. Now the process, Pearson and Mitroff gave 5 basic phases of crisis management, out of which one is, first is signal detection. When we say we are in pre-crisis phase, signal detection basically means the anticipation of the crisis. A company can receive signals of the impending crisis from different sources, from both internal and external environments, from both human resources and technical resources. When you say people, there are gossips, rumors, grapevines going inside the organizations, of which 90% may not be true, but 10% gives a signal that they are leading to something. And then we have the research agencies, research findings, government, media, industry feedback, out of which certain cues could be taken so that this may not spiral into a crisis for the company. So these certain signals, they prepare or brief any organization about the crisis that may happen in future. And then of course there are preparations, prevention, containment and damage limitation, which is done by taking corrective measures as well as communicating those measures to the outside public. And then there is recovery. After crisis has happened, the company shows signs of recovery, and then there is of course learning. What are the lessons learned? So that these crises do not appear in future. I think there are lessons, there should be lessons that has to be learned, and that has to be well documented for future reference. what is the importance of PR during crisis? Now, PR essentially is important to maintain liaison with public, to maintain a good image in the eyes of public, to build brand equity and reputation. In times of crisis, it becomes all the more important, because a certain communication has to be, a concerted communication rather, has to be made with customers, so that the good relations till that time of crisis do not take a beating. It also has to build and create reputation and image of the company once again. It maintains company's credibility, it reduces the communication gap, and overall it is essential for a successful business overall, because businesses works on promises, on brand equities. We have examples of so many big companies which are a big brand, and they work on trust and brand promise. I think that is the most important aspect of any organization's business perspective. Now, what are the features of crisis PR? These are the important things that should be taken care of while dealing with the communication part, that is the PR part in times of crisis. Timely, it has to start as early as possible. One of the ex-employees, for example, one of the ex-employees of Domino's, he made a video inside the premises, and where it showed that the food is being tempered by some chef, and it was shown in very bad light. Now that video was leaked on YouTube. Company initially thought that this is not a big deal and we can live without it, but in 24 hours the YouTube videos, the views on YouTube, it crossed 1 million mark. Now it was too late for them. So initially they anticipated that it will die down, and they did not take timely action. By the time they took action and mounted a counter video that showed, the CEO of the company himself coming on the video and assuring people that this has not happened, and we are doing all good things, we are taking corrective measures, and we deeply apologize, all these. Now this video came 24 hours later, but damage was done by then. So I think timely action is very important, swift in its response, top down with feedback respect. The message has to come from the top. In times of crisis, the most important person is the CEO of the company, which leads the communication, which is the face of the organizations, and which is the most authentic voice in the company. I think that is the person who should take charge. So it has to come from top to down. Of course, he has a team of legal advisors, he has a team of PR people, he has his own in-house personal HR department for internal communications, but it should come from top to down, from CEO to downwards, and then to the external public and media. Unequivocal, like I said, you have to be frank and honest. In time of crisis, the most important thing is that one should be honest. You should say yes, acknowledge that a crisis has happened. This is where one can start with. He has to be unequivocal, because if there are ifs and buts, then it is looked upon as excuses that are being trumped up, to mislead public probably. And then the feedback in time of crisis, there are regular feedback coming in from the public. What is going to happen? Situation changes in a matter of hours. So one's approach should be flexible to the feedback that is received in times of crisis, from both from inside and outside. And of course, addressing the relevant and immediate stakeholders, because if we don't address our stakeholders, and the things are going to go bad, because the trust of the public will go further down if they are not addressed and communicated about the crisis properly. Now this is the communication command grid. Like we said, it has to come from the top. The communication director is the head, then there are spokesperson, command center coordinator, and then there are media managers, research and media monitoring team, media support staff. Now from command center coordinator, there are external communication and internal special coordinators, and of course the volunteers and other support staff. So whole organization is in the picture in terms of crisis, but it has to come from top to bottom. Now what could be the choices of media in crisis PR? Now the world has changed, times have changed in the last 1 decade and a half. Earlier there used to be traditional forms of media like print media, electronic media, and even radio. Now newer forms of media have come up, and now suddenly we are living in a world that is no privacy actually. I mean, there are a lot of invasions through internet, through social media, Facebook, WhatsApp. So there are the modes of communication that have emerged nowadays are very fast, very accessible, and very quick. So therefore the flow of information, both inside and outside, is very swift. Now if a rumor goes out, the counter rumor has to come with that same speed. So I think the choice of media has become more important. It has evolved more in these times, and the media chosen should be such that it is available to all. Right? Because we want to reach maximum people in times of crisis. So media is carefully to be chosen that it access all, whether it is print, whether it is television, nowadays whether it is, we talk about let's say WhatsApp messages. WhatsApp has become a rage, so I mean even companies are promoting themselves through WhatsApp. So I think choice of media, social media rather, would be an advisable proposition in times of crisis. And of course there should be a mix of mediums. We cannot rely upon one medium. So an integrated campaign is required, because voices are coming, distrust is coming from all directions, from all media. People bare their hearts and pains on social media, right? So these negative news or rumors has to be countered on the same platform as it is coming from. So there has to be an integrated campaign, and then there is a mix of traditional and new media. I think that is very important. Now about the crisis message, it has to be honest. First of all, like I said, it has to be transparent. Nothing should be passed on as bluffing. It should be clear and understandable, and it should be empathic. See, what happens is, I think we can sum the whole response in 2-3 points. The communication that goes out in times of crisis, A, it is to be honest, B, it has to be clear, and C, it has to be empathetic. Because if we do not seem to be empathetic to the people, I think that sends a very wrong message. So an apology and empathy. In times of crisis, you can't be aggressive and say that you can't live in denial mode, say that nothing has happened and nothing will happen. Acknowledge something has happened, be honest about it, apologize for it, and put proper mechanisms in place to check it, and then your message should seem to be empathetic to the people. Like all big companies have done. If you see the response of big companies, big brands rather, they adhere to all these virtues of communication in times of crisis. I think that is most successful PR campaigns in times of crisis have all these ingredients in their communication. Now we have a case study here with us to show how crisis management could be done ideally. Odwalla is the US-based health conscious juice company which has a very strong presence with sales rising at the rate of 30% per year and even reaching the $90 million mark. It has a strong brand equity. It's a big brand in US of juices, fresh juices. Now in 1996, some health officials in Washington state informed the company that they have discovered a link between the several cases of E. coli bacteria and the company's apple juice. And as a consequence, one child died. More than 60 people in United States and Canada became sick after drinking the juice. And sales, of course, plummeted by 90%. And as a result, its stock price fell at 34%. And then, of course, there were certain lawsuits in US. They cost you a fortune. 20 personal injury lawsuit, and the company looked as though it would be destroyed. Now this was a classic case of a company being bogged down by crisis. Now when some authentic source raises a concern, that becomes all the more difficult for the company to counter it. So it needed strategic intervention, which company did, and how it emerged out of the crisis, that we're going to see. Now its CEO ordered a complete recall. The first thing you do is recall all the products because that is seen to be a genuine gesture that shows empathy, that shows concern on the part of the company for people, so that if certain wrong has happened, the company is on a corrective course. That sends out a very strong message. It recalled its products from across 4,600 retail outlets across 7 states. And in all his media interaction, the CEO empathized and apologized and immediately promised that company would pay all medical costs. Now these are the measures that restores the belief of people in the company. So that is one big positive step, to acknowledge and to take corrective actions. Only then you can go to the public and say that we have done this, and therefore we seek your trust once again. Now with internal communications, he conducted a regular company-wide conference on daily basis and gave his internal employees a real briefing about what has happened and what we are going to do next to deal with these situations. And then external communications. Now the company was very swift. Within 24 hours, it had set up a website for all the questions, answers, and for all the updates about the crisis, so that there is a proper interaction channel maintained with the public through all means. And internet is a big medium, so it had its perspective in detail on the website, and of course it received a good response within the next 2 days. And all possible attempts were made to provide up to the minute, accurate information. Accuracy again is very important, I emphasize, because you cannot afford to be seen to be bluffing to public. I think that is very important in terms of crisis. Now, how company fixed the problem? The next step was to tackle the problem of contaminations. It immediately switched from unpasteurized juice to a process called fresh pasteurizations, so that people can be rest assured that the bacteria has been destroyed without compromising the quality and flavor, without compromising the core strength and taste of the brand. Now within months of outbreak, the company had in place was most comprehensive quality control and safety system in fresh juice industry. New process was communicated in all advertising and public outreach campaign. That is the role of media in post-crisis scenario, that the steps taken by the company and the intent of the company is taken to the masses through a mediated campaign, through a consorted public relation campaign. Then we have our own in-house case. I mean, in India, in Mumbai, there were complaints raised by a person of finding worms in the chocolate, in Cadbury chocolates. Now the same was reported to the FDA commissioner, who in turn emphasized that the Cadbury's Talegaon plant will be inspected. This was the first step that was taken by the authority, and the State Food and Drug Administration ordered the abduction of Cadbury Dairy Milk chocolates from all over Maharashtra after worms were found in 2 of them. Now companies said that bad stories, practices by retailers and distributors that had led to the worm. Of course, this was a company was trying to find an escape route to blame it on the retailers and distributors. And then as a result, the festival season sales, which was nearly 1,000 tons in the normal course during Diwali, they plummeted by 30%. So it was a huge loss for the company, and the biggest loss was because Cadbury is a very big brand in India and abroad, and of course it has a top of the mind recall. The first brand that comes to your mind when you hear of chocolate is Cadbury. So there was huge danger to brand equity of Cadbury. It suffered a lot, both in terms of image, both in terms of sales and public trust. of course, the first thing that company did was it did not deny the fact. Although the Maharashtra Food and Drug Administration had given a clean chit to the company, but they did not deny the fact and briefed the consumers about the improper storage. And the company's MD went to media offices around the country and he actually apologized for what had happened, advertently or inadvertently. And that was the best thing that one can do in a crisis. Then company launched a project which was a retail education program for generating and providing assistance in improving storage quality. Now this was seen as a gesture that company is taking an initiative so that this event may not happen again. That is very important. That did a lot of good to the company in restoring that trust back, because it seemed to be working in the direction which is in the welfare of the public, which can restore the trust of the public. And then they introduced new double packaging even for the smallest offerings in aluminum foil, which was there for the public to see. They changed. Company also carried out quality checks from time to time. Amitabh Bachchan, he was the brand ambassador of Cadbury at the time, and he played a vital role in communications relating to Cadbury products and brands, because Amitabh Bachchan is a big star and his own brand equity came to the rescue of Cadbury. If Amitabh Bachchan says something, that of course becomes authentic in the eyes of public. So Amitabh Bachchan bringing Amitabh Bachchan on board was a very good initiative by the company to regain its image. Then it created a campaign which aimed for both rational and emotional appeal. That is very important. It was the ideal mix of rational and emotional appeal. When Amitabh Bachchan talked of the Cadbury brand, he at two levels, because of his professional excellence, there was a kind of rational appeal that company has accepted what has happened, but the real cause of problem was not company, it was probably the bad storage facilities and all. So there were attempts to rationalize on the one hand, and there were attempts by the company to emotionalize the pitch, because there has been a long association of the people with the brand. So therefore company did not want that bond to go weak. Therefore it also raised its pitch on an emotional landscape to continue this association. So as a result, the company bounced back soon, and between October 2003 and January 2014, Cadbury's value share, which has melted from 73 to 69%. The recovery began in May 2004 when the Cadbury's value share went up to 71%. So company salvaged the situation very well. It dealt with it. Was a very comprehensive response, both rational and emotional. So I think from these two case studies we have seen that if a proper public relation campaign is carried out, I think that spells a lot of good for the company in times of crisis. That is very important. We have also seen certain cases where public relation campaign has not gone right. When there are cases of mass destruction in Bhopal gas tragedy, for example, in 1984, Union Carbide had one of its plants had a leak and 2,000 people died immediately. 8,000 people died in next 2 weeks and another 16,000 died in the subsequent times. In that situation, that was a very humanitarian crisis. It was there was a big loss of life. So per se, I don't think any kind of public relation exercise can restore the amount of faith, because A, it was a foreign company, B, there was a huge loss of life. So life was very difficult. Even a concerted PR campaign could not save the company, and even till date the company has been sold off now. But the image of the company in the eyes of public still is not good. People hate it. So I think a good public relation campaign can of course do a lot of good in the times of crisis, but this cannot be taken as the final end or the final solution. The real thing, a real good that company can do to itself is to anticipate the crisis, to have a proper mechanism, to have a proper support team that can prevent crisis from happening. And then you should of course have some sensible and cool-headed people in your company who can, communicate freely in times of crisis and be honest and be empathetic. And of course then public relation part comes into picture when at the times of when crisis has happened, the proper communication of the intent of the company and the corrective measures taken by the company is properly communicated to the public through public relation, a good public relation campaign. I think that is the crux of matter. That is what is important.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so very much for delivering such a nice lecture and telling us constantly that how honesty plays a crucial role while managing the problems within the organization, as well as how one should be apologetic while the crisis happens, and one should be responsible and accountable to the problem which has persisted or has been taken place. Now the question arises, if we identify the problems well in advance, do you feel so the problems which persist in the organization or which certainly suddenly pop out within the organization could be solved very easily?
Yes, to some extent, but I would still believe that we can anticipate the crisis, but we cannot say for sure that when it is going to happen, how it is going to. We can just have anticipation of the crisis. There are no sure methods by which we can say that we are going to pinpoint what is going to happen tomorrow. That of course cannot be the case. But I think if we have a proper system in place where we can, receive proper signals, we can decode them, we can take certain precautionary measures, I think a lot of crisis could be avoided if we have a proper institutional mechanism in place. Of course, like I said before, we can have the best of the machines, even that cannot prevent accidents from happening because of, when the human factor is involved. You never know what has happened. Suppose a person is, accidentally plunges into a machine and the person happens to be a union leader. Now what will happen? If we were not a union leader, things would not have been so difficult. I mean, if a union leader falls prey to an accident, now this crisis was not seen by the company. I mean, even if it is a crisis in normal circumstances, it would not have gone to that level if, for example, a union leader. So you cannot predict actually how big the crisis will be, but of course you can take precautionary measures that they don't happen in the first place.
Well, it's as you said that precautionary measures could be taken, but if long-term plannings or the short-term plannings could be made in well advanced, of course, to some extent the problems could be retaliated or could be minimized.
Yes, of course, in big brands, big companies, even in India, they have a proper team in place that starts from the CEO of the company. CEO has a proper segregated department. When there is a legal department, there is a public relation department. They have an outside experts, both on board and they have people from outside who advise them how to avert a crisis. So if these mechanisms are in place, the probability of company landing into a crisis reduces. It does not eliminate it, but of course the probability is reduced because you can, and you have that kind of information, you can have that kind of feedback with you which helps you to avoid landing in such a situation.
And do you feel so that communication should be a cyclic process within the organization, that is the media professional or the PR professional which is there in the organization should continuously coordinate with all the departments of the organization. He should know even the smallest or the biggest thing which is happening in the organization so
Absolutely.
that he could help out for the future crisis.
Absolutely. That's why company has a proper mechanism for internal communications through emailers, through newsletters, through memos. I think if the activities of the organizations, both inside and outside, are briefed properly to the employees, to the people who are concerned, I think that will make them better informed, both of the external and internal environment. And of course, that reduces the chances that you end up in a crisis that you have not foreseen. So I think proper communication is important. Apart from the internal communications, maintaining a good relationship with media is very important. When there is no crisis, you can't say that we we can't have a sustained campaign for so long. But a certain kind of liaison, certain kind of relationship with media at all point in time is very important, because you never know when you have a crisis at your hand. So I think it is not a 1 month, 2 month kind of a process. It is a continuous process. It has to go round the year. When there is crisis and when there is no crisis, I think it should be a perpetual and long winding period when you have this kind of interaction with media. That helps a lot.
Going apart from the organization, if we talk about the country as a whole, as you have heard and might have read in the newspapers, that the cyclone Hudhud, which has recently occurred, because it was forecasted in the very beginning, so it was easier for the country, for the disaster management to plan in well advance and evacuate the places where it was likely to occur. So forecasting is an important element while handling with the crisis.
Yes, absolutely. Now this was a casualty. This was a crisis which could have easily been anticipated, because we have mechanisms in place where we have weather forecast, we have all our satellite communication links where we can actually pinpoint when a tragedy is going to occur, such kind of natural calamity, right? Even in cases of floods, even in earthquakes, we have this. Japan is the most one of the most developed countries of the world, and I think the only developed country apart from 2-3 others. Even then in Japan, people die of earthquakes. Why? They have a proper mechanism in place to actually pinpoint when it's going to happen, but even people die even there. So what we can do is, even in the Hudhud case, there was a proper briefing to the people. Even then people died, but the loss was far less than it would have when this information was not in place. Mm-hmm. So I think that is very important. We can reduce the extent of your loss. In terms of company, the extent of the loss of your reputation, that is mitigated when you have a proper information and feedback with you. I think that is the best one can do. And eventually if it happens, then it depends how much smart people do you have in your company to salvage it.
Emergencies are emergencies, for example, the natural calamities or something like that, because they are not under our control. But yes, as you said, that it could be minimized, the losses could be minimized, and the reputation can be maintained. So we often use it propaganda while we talk about the public relations. But sometimes we have often seen that people use to propaganda, though it is a negative term, but still they use it for the sake of that they'll get the publicity. But how so far have you seen, through your knowledge as you have worked in the various organizations, this propaganda, it is a cause of taking somebody's collar and snatching somebody's good things from his hand, has played a very important role while in the crisis communication?
See, propaganda in crisis communication, it is very important that you seem to be sincere. You have to look sincere even if you are not by any chance. First of all, you have to be sincere in your approach post-crisis. Even if you are not sincere, then you have to look like you are sincere. Your image should be such that it doesn't look like a propaganda. Mm-hmm. When it looks like a propaganda, that becomes a problem. So I think if you are honest and if you seem to be honest, I think that solves a lot of problem. That is, propaganda basically is done by, in India, multinationals are, the regional players are suffering. So there is a lot of propaganda is a negative term per se, but if we can put it very mildly, there is an onslaught of communication. In that onslaught, I think problem comes when the important message loses out, and the important message is that we are sincere and we are not doing it just because we want to grab the market share, or we want to remove the market competition or something like that. So I think that also sends out a very wrong message. Like the problem with Walmart was that Walmart was seen as a giant who can swallow everybody, every regional player, even the traders, small traders and all those things. So there was a very negative kind of feel that was generated for the Walmart, even if it did not indulge in the propaganda, that was seen to be as a propaganda. So I think that perception of the public matters. If public sees it as a propaganda, I think that becomes a problem. If public sees it as an honest gesture of intent on the part of the company, I think crisis can be resolved very quickly and with a mitigated loss.
As you said, even if it is not a propaganda, it is portrayed as if it is a propaganda, because if we talk about the media, which is always wants to grab the content for what is going within the organization, is used to make that particular thing as propaganda. What do you feel as a PR professional one needs to maintain relationship with the media while handling crisis at most?
I think the relationship with media, as I have told before, it's not about that you deal with media, you interact with media only in time of crisis. It has to be done at all times, because when there are positive things about your company, you need to inflate those positive things and get it endorsed by the third party, that is media. You cannot blow your own trumpet and say, look, I am the number one kid on the block. I am this, I am that, I have got this much of market share, I have got this much of quality. No, it doesn't matter. Only if a third party that is seen to be authentic, trustworthy, like media in general, it's a third party, first being the consumer and second being the company. So I think that endorsement is very important, and that endorsement should come all the time, because see, when you are in a crisis, you cannot suddenly say, look, we are so good. No, it is your previous image at the time of crisis that is important, because Cadbury was a big brand and they had a very concerted media campaigns. What made them a big brand apart from the promise? Of course it had good taste, of course it is delightful, but what made it a good brand, a big brand? Media. Right? They had good campaigns running also. The image of Cadbury, for example, that was built over a longish period of time, I think that was very crucial in times of crisis, when company made an emotional appeal to the audience, say, look, we have such good relationship going on for so many years. This has happened and this is an aberration, we are going to come out of it. So people trusted them because of the image that it earlier carried. So that's why when you have a sustained image, I think in terms of crisis, that is insurance against the loss of reputation. And image building exercise, I think media has a crucial role to play. So to build that kind of image, you need media all the time. You need good advertising campaigns, you need good public relation campaign, so that even when you end up in a crisis, you have something behind you that you can go to the public with and say, yes, of course, this was an aberration and things will be hunky-dory again. So I think that's important. That's where the media plays a role.
Definitely, media plays an important role while building the reputation of a particular company or the organization, as we have been talking continuously, that while handling the crisis communication, that is while handling the crisis, how crisis communication plays an important part. But as you already said, that one needs to be honest, but when at the time of crisis, the emergency which occurs, at that time, just by saying sorry, is this honesty? Or keeping in mind that, yes, we have to keep in mind the reputation of the company also. Does one requires, or the media professional requires, to be very balanced?
Absolutely. I think this is a very pertinent question. See, if I slap somebody on the road and hit him hard, and I say, just sorry, I'm sorry, I think that is not sufficient. You have to convince him that I hit you, I slapped you because I had a very good reason to do that. You explain to him the reason and then say sorry. I think that mix is very important. If we take it to organization level, acknowledging a problem is just a one step. It is the first step. Saying sorry about it is the second step, because that shows that you are empathetic to them. Right? And to make a promise that it will not happen again, that is another part. I mean, that is a part of that. You can't say sorry and get on. No, because you are in a business of going concern. You have to do business again. You have to bring your company back on track. How will that happen? Only saying sorry is not enough. Now, when you say it will not happen again, when you make a promise, you have to take the corrective steps. and there is a product malfunction, you have to recall all the stuff, correct it, and give it back. I think that is very important. So you seem to be doing good, you seem to be looking good, right? It does not happen, I mean, just on the basis of an apology. You have to take the corrective steps and then again go to the public and say, look, this is what we have done, we have acknowledged, we have taken the corrective steps, we have apologized, it will not happen again, and we want you to trust us for the relation that we have carried on for so many years. And for that endorsement, I mean, people wrote in celebrities, they go to press is therefore a very potent medium because it's a third party endorsement. Then they go to the celebrities and people who have credibility, because the people's credibility is associated with the brand. I think that is a very heavy cocktail in terms of crisis. So you have to do a lot of things. There has to be a proper chain of events that lead to a successful PR campaign in times of crisis. Apology is just one part. Being honest is, of course, these are core values. You can't say, okay, we have done the corrective measures, it will not happen again, but we are not sorry for what has happened. So that seems very arrogant. So all these little things, when put up together, I think they lead to a situation where a company can successfully garner, the loss of reputation. And even I would even go to the extent to suggest that the crisis should be seen as an opportunity. I think in times of crisis you tend to learn a lot of things. You tend to anticipate a lot of things that were not there earlier. Right? Then there are lessons for the future to be learned. If there is a crisis in the company, that perhaps if proper lessons are learned can lead to the foundation where a bigger crisis can be avoided.
Definitely, so bigger crisis could well be avoided. With this note, we would like to take your leave. Thank you so very much for giving deep insight to this very topic, and hope in future also we would be conducting more lectures on crisis communication or public relations, and through your vast and immense knowledge we are going to learn more. Thank you, sir. Thank you so
much.
much.
Thank you, everybody.